Hey everyone,
Yeah. Hello,
Ryan Rizzo
everyone.
with Tellus News and Simon Rosenberg with Hopium Chronicles, an old friend of mine. Simon, I
Yes.
noted we've known each other for I think we first got to know each other in the 2003, 2004 cycle, I believe, back when everyone was fighting. I was at the New Republic. You were at NDN at that time, right?
Yep. Yep.
And the big story in the primaries was, everyone fighting, the Dean folks fighting against the Kerry folks, the kind of classic insurgent versus establishment fight.
Yep.
And new media was so much a part of that primary. And back then it was all about the blogs. And I remember you and I used to have
Yeah.
a running conversation about new media. And anyway, we don't have to get into that, but it's great to see you as always.
Yeah. Good to see you, brother. Welcome to Substack. It's great to have you here. The water is warm. We welcome you. I've been here. I joined Substack. Hopium started March of 23.
Wow, so
So yeah,
that's early.
yeah. So we were, and I was when I started Hopium, there was definitely in Washington, it was like, what in the world is Substack? Right? People thought I was insane to have shut. I mean, Ron Brownstein did an entire interview and profile of me on the Atlantic, which was like, what are you doing? Going from shutting down NDN to go create, this new community. But part of the rationale is that during the election in 2022, I argued that we needed to build out pro-democracy media, is the term that we all use, and that if I was advocating for it, I needed to do it myself. And so Hamish, who you've gotten to know, who runs, is one of the guys that runs Substack, reached out to me during the 2022 cycle. And I said, let's talk after the election. We had a series of talks. I experimented on it. I spent, a couple months, posting every day and seeing if I could really do it. And we launched on March 7th, 2023.
Well, it reminds me of those conversations we had 20 years ago because you
Yeah.
were an early adopter of blogs, and I remember you telling me I was, writing at the New Republic, a very kind of old-fashioned weekly magazine back
Yeah.
then. And I remember this very well, Simon. I remember you saying like uh get with it. Like new media is coming, blogs are coming. Don't turn your nose down at that stuff. They are in direct competition with, opinion journals like the New Republic or National Review or The Nation. Yeah, I remember you telling me, attention is a finite resource. And if people are reading blogs and not reading the New Republic, then, that's an issue and you have to take it seriously. And I won't take the blame for this, but at the New Republic at the time, I think there were like a lot of people in the print world were really, really slow to understand digital media. And anyway, that was a really important conversation back then. So you've always been someone who has been willing to embrace the new.
Yeah, I mean, look, I wrote the foreword to Marcos Melitz's first book, and in my opening introduction, I said, Marcos and I don't agree on many things. We didn't agree on the Iraq War. We didn't agree on this and that, but that we're all playing different positions on the same team, and that I admired and respected his courage and leadership, and that I was really proud to support him in his book. And I was a big proponent of the early blogosphere. Yes, Substack feels a little bit like that, right? Because it's word based, right? And although Substack is now evolving into something that's obviously far more than words. But I'll be honest, Ryan, I've been a political guy and I ran a think tank, but I've been writing every day for 2 years or close to every day. And it's really been one of the most rewarding professional periods in my career, to be able to. And one of the reasons I went to Substack is I felt that Substack gave us so much. You could just do whatever you wanted, right? And the way they integrated, video and pictures and charts and graphs, it was really sort of creating a better way of conveying, more sophisticated way of politics, right? Like the stuff that I've worked on. I've always been a little bit of a, working on the elite end of the business as opposed to the retail part of the business, right?
Yeah.
So it's been very rewarding to actually write, every day, and because it's Hopium is now 7 days a week, and I'm going to scale it back to 6 days soon. But
What day are you
um,
going to take off?
Sunday.
All right, Sunday. All right, that's when I'm going to bug you to do one of these.
No, I want to just go watch baseball games on Sundays. That's going to be my big
Wait,
thing.
I think the people watching might be interested in this. What is your like daily practice in terms of getting up, scanning through the headlines and
Yeah.
writing? Like what's your schedule?
Yeah, it's funny, I've never been asked this before, so I get up every day around 7:15, and Hopium usually is out by around 10:30, 11.
Wow.
And it takes me about 3 hours, 3.5 hours to some days more, some days less. I don't do any pre-writing. I get up fresh every morning and I scan the information world the way that we all do. I mean, I do put things aside, right? Like you make a
Like today was
decision.
about the Pope. Today was about the Pope. A lot of news
Open up,
broke. So how
yeah.
much did you go to? How much was in your head when you went to sleep last night?
Well, it's interesting. I was actually today was going to be a video interview. Originally, yesterday, the plan was that today would be a video interview that I did with David Jolly, who's going to probably run for governor in Florida. And I ended up postponing until tomorrow because late as the day went on yesterday and the enormity of what happened with the Pope, our new Pope, Pope Bob, Pope Leo the 14th, and the fact that we had a Twitter troll who had attacked JD Vance and Donald Trump on Twitter somehow become the Pope. The enormity of that just sort of grew with me over the day, and so I'll be honest with you. I don't know what I'm going to write most days when I sit down. I mean, I have notions and I have notes and things, but I really what I try to do at Hopium, and honestly, this is like the first time I've ever talked about this. I don't view Hopium as a newsletter. I view it as an import letter. And what I mean by that is that I try
Import
to
letter.
import, meaning importance. I try to focus on that morning, what is the most important stuff I can convey to my community, as opposed to being what's new.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big difference in that, right? I'm not a news organization. I'm something other than that. I'm a community run by a political guy, and
Right.
yeah,
You are at the end of the day, you are a democratic
at,
activist and
yeah,
strategist too. Yeah.
who's trying to help win elections, right? And
Yeah.
use this platform to inform, but also to win. And so I sit down, you know, every morning. It's 7:15, 7:30, and I write fresh. I don't have anything pre-written ever.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I've just found it's better that way. Like when I write stuff that's pre-written and I try to cut and paste it or put it in, it feels stale. And so it's very much reactive in how I feel about like what's really happening that matters today. And that's my approach, right? I mean, what's great about Substack is that everyone's got their own thing, and there
Yeah.
is no right way, wrong way. There's just whatever works for you. And but
You're
I do think that
fast because what you wrote this morning was quite comprehensive in terms of, I mean, some of it's aggregation, but just aggregating stuff sometimes takes a lot of work to sort of sift through what's out there and pick and choose and just logistically, technically putting it together. So
yeah,
someone who, wrote a daily newsletter for a while at
I know.
Politico,
One read by a lot more people than mine, but by the way. Yeah.
well, you'd be
Yeah.
surprised. You'd be surprised. You have a very big audience, and
Yeah.
so
So let
it's
me just
similar.
say,
But
can I just
anyway, you're fast.
I know. Well, let me just say one thing. First of all, when you write every day, you get faster, right? And you know that. It's like being in shape in sports or whatever, right? You're just more. But
Absolutely.
the thing I wrote today, it's just interesting we're talking today. I loved what I wrote today because I really felt that what I did was I pulled together a lot of disparate threads
Hmm.
into something that was more of an analysis, right, than like a newsletter. It was more that because you can get the news from a million places, right? But
Right.
I hope what you're getting is my brain, right, and my ability to see all of this and interpret it based on my years of experience. And today I felt like I kind of broke new ground a little bit in my own, even in my own thinking. Like I tried to do this morning and I pulled it off in a way that I wasn't sure when I began. And there have been days where I've tried to pull off complicated things that didn't work. And then you're kind of screwed because it's 10:30 and my newsletter's not out and I got to start all over again, right? But what I loved about today, and this gets to Substack too, and the platform, is that I was really able to pull what happened with the Houthis and what happened this week and what happened with the fake trade deal yesterday, and to advance an argument that I've been making over the last few weeks, that I think that Trump is acting like someone who's desperate,
Mm.
that he knows he's losing, he knows he's failing, that he knows his thing is rotten and not working, and that his public performance is starting to become more wild, incoherent, performative, theatrical, Alcatraz, right? The NFL thing. And all of this has felt to
Tariffs
me,
on foreign movies, which
yeah,
then
yeah,
just
tariffs on foreign movies. And I know he does this stuff all the time, but it's had in the last few weeks, to me, as a political person, has been here for 33 years, watching all these guys do their thing, it's felt desperate and pathetic and weird. And his interviews that he did with ABC and NBC were like, we've all seen this guy a million times. They felt to me like a higher order of crazy than
mm,
we have seen. And his physical demeanor, particularly in the NBC interview, he looked defeated and down and just like beaten up, and was slurring his words. And so I do think that he has been even wilder and more um, unhinged in the last few weeks than he had been earlier. And the reason this matters, right, to put it all together, is that I do think that his power is ebbing in Washington. That the sort of the ridiculousness of his thing. I joke that people are waking up that the emperor has no clothes, and we realize it's the ugliest thing that any of us have ever seen, right? But I do think that in this town, right, when power can be very fleeting, and I was on a call, I was on a Substack live recently with Stuart Stevens, and he talked about how after Katrina, Bush never was able to regain the authority in the city, and that Biden lost a big chunk of his authority on Afghanistan. It wasn't the only thing, right?
yep.
And I think that Trump has already passed into a place where it's possibly his presidency is irredeemable, and that it's already a failed presidency. And because in polling terms, and then I'll be done with this rant, is that
No, no,
in
go on.
polling
That's very interesting, Simon.
in polling terms, what happens in our business is that, like, you're bad on healthcare and you're bad on this, so then you go live in these places that are more popular, right? Like, you redirect your energy.
Yeah,
Trump is in negative territory on everything, on every issue. He has no place to go bring his approval rating up, right?
yeah.
They don't, in terms of strategy and how this town works, they don't have a way out of the box that they're in, right? And so, it's he's in a lot of trouble. And I think that it's manifesting the pressure and the sense, because Trump sees the world fundamentally through strong and weak, winning and losing. Everything is about that. It's the fundamental filter in which everything goes. And right now he's losing and weak. And I think that is putting tremendous pressure on him personally, and it's
Mm.
manifesting in his performance. The Houthi deal. Let me just go through this, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah.
didn't have it. They didn't have a truce. They just walked away, right? They screwed Israel, right? They ran away with their tails between their legs. The Houthis declared victory. We've been embarrassed in the Middle East. They tried to put lipstick on the pig in domestic U.S. press. But in reality, he did a lot of damage to the United States. And it's clear that this was done sort of in a panicky, impulsive way. The same thing with this trade deal. There's no
Yeah.
deal there. There's nothing behind it. It's a concept of a plan, right? That they rolled out and tried to make it look really important. Why? Because he's bleeding, and that
And the
they're
press buys
desperate.
this every time.
The press
Press will
buys it.
they buy
Yeah.
the headline, and then, you just a cursory glance at the news, a lot of people probably think those two things that you just mentioned, the deal with the Houthis and this trade deal with the UK. I bet if you asked, like, someone who's moderately paying attention to things, those headlines would have crossed one of their feeds, or they saw a newspaper, and maybe didn't get the follow up that both of them totally collapsed on closer inspection, which happens
Right.
with issue after issue. And I blame the media a lot for this. Is that we're so obsessed with breaking a story, and the White House just manipulates reporters so easily. So they put out a thing that, oh, tomorrow there's going to be a major deal with the UK that will drive 1,000 headlines, right? You have no information about what the deal actually is. 1,000 more headlines will driven by Trump actually saying it, and then everyone moves on and doesn't look under the hood to realize this was a fraud.
Right. And I think that, I call it chasing the new. That part of the strategy that Trump has and
Yeah.
his team has is it's always chafe in the air. They want us to chase the new, and which is why my newsletter stays, we chase what's important, right? We try to stay grounded in what matters, not and don't chase the new. Because chasing the new is how he's essentially hacked the entire information ecosystem of the United States, or one of the ways they've hacked it, right? And so part of our resistance to that is to not chase the new, right?
Yeah.
And so part of what I try to do at Hopium, like you described, is that I tried to explain today, for example, that, not only did the circle, you wanted to talk about this concept of circle of defiance, but that the circle of defiance has grown because of what's happened with the Pope, right? Where now the Vatican is joining the resistance. But these two things that happened this week that were done to make it appear as if he was doing constructive and positive things were both actually ridiculous and absurd, and that we have to be able, and it fit in with my belief about where he was going, which is that I think they're panicking. I actually really think the White House is in a form of panic because they're rolling things out that are half baked, half cooked in ways that, yeah, they may get 24 hours of news headlines. But as you know, Ryan, part of what I think is also happening with the media is that the circle of defiance is growing with the media. That he's lost some of his authority. They're still going to chase the new and play the games, but
Yeah.
for the New York Times to publish a story yesterday on Melania missing, right? And being gone and like not in the White House. And she's literally in the headline was she's missing. They would not have published that a month ago, right? They just wouldn't have done it. They would have been too
Mm.
scared. And I think what's happening is that the bending of the knee is becoming let by whomever is becoming less frequent, less, and that the circle of defiance, the ambition of defiance, the sort of the mentality of defiance, which is I'm not going to let his definition of reality become my own. I'm not going to be obedient to the way that they understand the world. That I think that process of people defying that has grown significantly across all of American society. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have this backsliding that happens and somebody occasionally bend the knee.
Yeah.
But amount of time that people are bending the knee, I think is decreasing, and that it's getting harder and harder. And even today, right? I mean, uh, Rumesa Ozturk was released. This was a huge blow to Trump and his regime, his rancid, immigration regime. The judge just released her just released her, right? Didn't do this kind of song and dance. We'll wait for
Yep.
5 days and everything else. Boom, gone, right? And I think that's what I mean about the circle of defiance growing. I think that you're seeing more and more elements of our society recognizing the game, which is that he's actually a guy with far less power than it appears. Because the thing about in authoritarian regimes, it's the aura of power, it's the perception of power that matters in some ways. So people do obey in advance, and that they become complicit in advancing the regime's desires. And that's why the idea of people starting to increasingly defy
Yep.
on a much bigger scale with far more ambition throughout, and I think that I will give credit. I think Alan Garber, the president of Harvard University, and that letter the way they defied the president was a major moment in kind of elite society starting to realize that they had to fight him and that they could fight him, right?
Yep.
I'm look, I where
I
I
agree with
sit.
you on this. Yeah.
Yeah, and where I sit now, just personally, I've been talking a lot today, so I'm a little tired. But is that I have two thoughts in my head simultaneously. One is that right. One is that he's breaking things that will be difficult, if not impossible, to repair, and that we have to act with enormous urgency at every moment. The second thought is that he's weakened and he's failing and he's flailing, and that his power is ebbing, and that it's getting harder and harder for people to look away at his madness and his awfulness and his craziness, and that both of these things are true at the same time, right? And so I'm a little bit more optimistic today than I was a week ago about us, limiting the damage that he's doing to the country. And I'm really proud of the American people. I think what we're learning is that, the muscle memory of democracy in this great country may have been stronger than people imagined, and that the resilience of our courts and federalism itself have also been a greater bulwark against Trump than we probably could have all understood a few months
Yeah.
ago. And so, I feel like he's been thwarted to some degree, and
Yeah.
but it's still, every day is a new day, and we have to keep fighting.
No, I agree with you on so much. And uh, psychologically, you can't underestimate the importance of people who are risk averse and institutions that are very, very risk averse, looking around and figuring out, you know, who's sticking their head out and doing something courageous, and then finding out what happens to them. Do they get it cut off or not before they're willing to do something similarly brave? And I think we're going to at least I'm going to remember the actors in the first few months that were quite cowardly when it comes to the media. I'll never forget ABC News, you know, settling that ridiculous lawsuit against George Stephanopoulos. Um, but doing that put all this pressure on CBS not to do
Yep.
something similar with 60 Minutes. We'll see how that unfolds, but they're going to be humiliated and remembered throughout history if they cave. The law firms, I mean, Paul Weiss will be remembered. A historic law firm that had done so many great things throughout its history, just absolutely caved in a cowardly way to this administration, and people are going to remember that, and they're going to remember Perkins Coie. People don't. Two law firms, people who normal people, myself, frankly included, wouldn't have any concept of what these firms are. I will always remember those two examples: one cowardly, one extremely brave. And you go down the line, the universities. We'll remember Columbia caving, and we'll remember Harvard standing up. And even when it comes to the judges, I think we can't underestimate how politics can influence judges who are, after all, human. And a brave opinion in one district can
Yeah.
stiffen the spine of a judge in another district. I'm not saying they're not making these decisions by closely reading the law, but it matters. It matters. So I think that your this circle of defiance phrase is quite evocative and explains what's going on. Having said all that, I do wonder, Simon, if a lot of the power that you see bleeding from Trump, I think I disagree with you a little bit on the craziness. I don't think he's actually acting any crazier than he ever has.
I know,
But
I know.
sometimes, so, but that's a hard thing to quantify. And that's always going to be very subjective. But how much is it just the tariff related economic shock that everyone experienced when the stock market went into free fall, and now uh, retail prices are up quite a bit. Everyone's bracing for the second and third wave effects of these tariffs. How much do you think the kind of Afghanistan moment or Hurricane Katrina moment that we seem to have witnessed here is just about that, like, basic law of gravity in politics, that he messed with the economy, and a lot of people who frankly don't pay attention the way that that you and I do,
Yeah.
just said, "Wait a second, I just voted for this guy, because I thought Kamala Harris was part of the Biden regime, and inflation was too high for my taste, and I kind of sort of remembered the first Trump term being economically okay." Anyway, how much do you think it's that has sort of sapped some of the political capital and
Well,
power?
I think it's so you put a lot on the table. Let me try to go through it in order, right? So I do think that the central thing that's driven down his approval rating, plummeted his approval rating, has been tariffs. And it started, even before 2025, before he became president. I mean, in polling, there was an awareness that he may implement tariffs and that prices would go up. And so voters had a very clear understanding early on that tariffs would increase their prices. And that Trump, to your point, not only promised that, because I do think that for the late deciding voters, mostly Hispanic and young men and independent voters who ended up voting for Trump at the end, and broke late at the end, people who, are, let's say, low political information voters, not low information voters, because I don't think anyone's low information anymore. It's just they don't follow news
Like
that carefully, and G. Elliott Morris calls them disengaged voters, is that those voters, I think the central reason they voted for Trump was that they believed they would do better financially and economically with him than with us. And that therefore all of this is a betrayal. It's not just that
interesting.
it is that. And so if you look at where his approval rating has dropped the most, it's with the groups that broke to him at the end. It's
Hmm.
Hispanics, young people, independent voters. And so his coalition is completely unraveled. G. Elliott Morris just did a whole analysis showing that the part that's dropped the most has been disengaged voters, and that there's
Hmm.
also significant overlap with those other voting groups that I'm talking about, right? Those are not separate. There's overlap. And so
And these
because
are the
they
voters, Simon, these are the voters that he needed to tend to the most. Like these were the most sort of tenuous in terms of
if the
staying in his
goal was to
coalition.
right, if the goal was to build a new majority coalition for the Republican Party, right? And that's why, and so that part of his support base, the ones that were sort of the weakest supporters that kind of wandered into his camp in the last 10 days of the election,
Yeah.
they've abandoned him. And it's pretty dramatic. I mean, even today, the Cook Report, wrote an article about this that is very similar to the stuff I've been writing over the last few weeks, is that, it's becoming now understood that this has happened, right? But I think in terms of the ebbing of the power, so number one is I think a lot of this has to do with the sense that, hey, I thought this guy was going to make me, I would have a better life, and I'm actually going to have a worse life. Like what WTF? I'm walking away from him. But when that happens, then it creates an opening for other arguments to be made.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things I've been surprised by is that the place where Trump in all of the polling in the last few weeks, and there was a ton of polling for the 100 days. So we had a lot of data. It was all very similar data. There was no like major outlier. And that's why sort of the general vibe in Washington and the media was that he had really screwed up, right? There was no article written saying, well, actually, maybe he had actually done a good job after all, right?
Yeah.
There wasn't
There's no contrarian take on
yeah,
this.
no, the consensus was actually kind of shocking, actually, right? And given how negative it was, and this is what I mean, that in that sense, that was almost also a moment of defiance by the DC-based media, is that they didn't, and the polling was so bad. Trump screamed about the polling, right? Is that the thing that's gotten where his support is the lowest on any issue was on disobeying the courts. In the Pew poll, he was at 19% on that issue,
People don't people don't like
and
that. Well,
they
it
don't
makes you
like that.
wonder who are the 19% that are like, yeah, it's
But
great
but
to
it's okay, because the thing is, in politics, if you are associating yourself with an issue that's in the low 40s, you're in trouble. If
yeah.
you associate yourself with an issue that polls at 19%, you are in like the political Hall of Fame for being an idiot, right? Like, I mean, and so they're like doubling down on a thing that polls at 19%. And that matters to voters, right? It may not matter as much as the economy, but it's not. The other issue that I think Democrats have a lot of running room on that we haven't totally tapped into yet in terms of these second fronts, or I call it a second and third front, is around the basket of issues that I think around public health, around ending medical research, making measles great again, and all the things that they're doing. And again, I go back to polling, right? The second lowest rated thing that he's done so far is cutting medical research, which polls at 20%, right? And so I think for us, we need to be on offense now. We need to be making the economic case, tanking the reconciliation bill for its plutocratic budget busting program, gutting, orientation that it is. We need to be opening up a much more robust second front around his abandonment of the constitutional order, dismantling of the federal government, selling out America to Russia, and then a third front around these basket of issues around public health and eliminating medical research and, basically putting the country in danger, which I think is going to go over really, really poorly with people once. And I was struck by, and my final exclamation point on this is that I think one of these, in a few weeks where Trump has done a whole lot of losing and not a lot of winning,
Yeah.
their pulling of this Surgeon General nominee and replacing her with this woman that is a kook, right? Is like a certifiable kook. Laura Loomer called her a witch, and in that she talks to trees. I mean, like the stuff that's true about her, she talks to trees, right? And
It,
so Trump just nominated a person who is not a practicing doctor, who didn't actually finish medical school, who is talks to trees and believes that vaccine mandates are illegal, right? Which good luck with that. That polls at like fucking 5%, right? Is that though they're putting her forward. And I think there is a point, Ryan. My point about this is that we're on this edge of a moment where he's not just failed and struggling, where he becomes ridiculous, where he
mhm.
becomes a comical figure that is like, you have to be kidding me. It cannot be this crazy, right? And whether you call it pulling the curtain back from the wizard or seeing that the emperor has no clothes, whatever the way you have of explaining this in your head, I think he's on the verge of becoming an absurd figure, not just a failed one. And because he is actually absurd,
Well,
he's
yeah.
painted and his hair and the girdle working overtime and all the stuff that he is, right? He's an absurd figure. And I'm part of my job. It's not your job, but part of my job is to help people understand the ridiculousness and absurdity of all this, and to break the spell, right? And I think
Well,
we're closer to
yeah.
that today than we've been in a long
Uh,
time.
you say it's interesting point when you say it's not my job. It is. I'm a journalist. It is my job to describe things clearly, accurately, and truthfully.
Yeah.
And if that this is the problem with so much of the media right now, is that a lot of journalists believe if they're telling the truth, describing things clearly and accurately, and that puts them on the side of the Democratic Party, or it puts that it has them saying the same things as Simon Rosenberg or other
God
Democrats.
forbid. Yeah, God forbid.
That is somehow partisan, and there's this just weird thing in political journalism where reporters get very, very uncomfortable when they report obvious truths that happen to align them with one party or the other. And I think that's absolutely absurd. It's like the dumbest version of both sidesism and false equivalence. I I don't think I think it's very much my job to point out the absurdities that we're all witnessing, and not to think that that is in any way partisan. I mean, this idea that reporters calling themselves pro democracy, that has become uh, among my colleagues in journalism, that has become like an affectation that you look down upon
Right,
to
of course.
talk about pro-democratic media. I mean small d,
Yeah.
um, and it's an enormous problem. It's one of the reasons I love being on Substack, and just the sort of being liberated from a lot of the groupthink and hidebound conventions of DC political journalism. A lot of these newsrooms are still they don't want to admit what's going on. They wish it were pre June 2015. That's when Trump went down the escalator. They wish that politics was the way it used to be, and it's not. And it's really, really hard for people in my profession to wrap their heads around the sort of emergency situation that everyone finds themselves in here in Washington. And it's uncomfortable. It's really uncomfortable to admit that a lot of the conventions of political journalism are not serving our readers. I talk about there are conventions that we have in journalism and there are principles, right? The conventions are there to serve the principles. And if someone comes along and an entire party and movement comes along and they've hacked your conventions, um, and you're no longer able to say clearly what the truth is because you have to both sides everything. Well, then you ditch the conventions or you tweak them. You don't sacrifice the principles, which is, the truth. And to me, that's sort of the extremely frustrating thing that's going on in journalism. Anyway, that's a
But
long
so
rant.
so wait,
So
I did a couple long rants, so that's okay. So let me just add fuel to your fire, right? Two things that my observation from somebody who grew up in the media business. I started my career at ABC News
I always forget that. That's
yeah,
right.
and
Yeah.
went into politics, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
was a writer producer for ABC News and grew up in that world and then migrated over to politics. I think there's two other things happening with the media that's creating the dynamic that you're describing. One is that I do think that there was that when people wrote stories that were good for Democrats and bad for Republicans, they got beat up really heavily on social media. And I think that was another way of them hacking the system. I think that was organized, strategic. And I think for a lot of journalists who are not political people, that aren't used to being yelled at and screamed at by people, right? This stuff was really uncomfortable for people. And it also creates a negative feedback loop, right? Like you don't want to be attacked. It's human nature, right?
Yep.
But the second thing is that I think the economics of a declining industry or a more competitive industry is that the reality is because of the nature of the right-wing media and how networked they are, that when you're at the New York Times and you have a headline that's a little bit more pro-Trumpy, you are going to get more clicks and your company makes more money and you live to fight another day. And I call it the black hole of right-wing media that's absorbing all of our commercial media into it because of the nature of the way the communities are networked, right? We are not networked on our side, and so when a positive story for Trump goes in the New York Times, it gets a lot more clicks than it does a positive story about Biden. And so media organizations then have this sort of slight bias. And the truth is, your old publication, Politico, I think for years, I always felt that there were often times where the headline and the story were like not aligned. And that there were,
Interesting. In which
yeah,
direction?
that the headlines would often be a little bit more Republican than the stories. And I think that in part it's possible that the headline writers and the business side of the publication understood that shading things a little bit to the right meant more clicks and more money, right? And we can't deny that that's actually like part of how this all works, right? Like, and so I do think that part of what happened at Substack is that I've gotten off of Twitter. I'm not getting the shit kicked out of me every day on Twitter, which became unpleasant. And I think you can do your work now here in a way that you're more insulated from some of those corrosive incentives that happen or the negative incentive of going onto social media and having, a million people attack you, 950,000 of whom are bots and not actual people. And I think that for a lot of journalists, they also didn't really understand how much Republicans spent time and energy doing intimidation tactics against reporters to
Yep.
persuade, like the equivalent of throwing a Molotov cocktail, through your window to make sure you knew they were there, so that if you wrote something they didn't like, they stayed with you for 48 hours, crapping all over you, right?
Yep.
And as somebody who's been on the receiving end of that stuff, of times where I've gotten 50,000 comments against me, that stuff, that's hard. Right?
Yeah.
We're human beings, right? We're all real people. And so I do think that part of what's happening is the liberating of our discourse from manipulated social media is a critical part of restoring the integrity of our discourse, going forward. And that's why I chose, as you have, to go to Substack.
I think you're right about that. And look, the only answer is that every reporter, unfortunately, maybe this will change. Maybe the transformations you're just describing there, maybe we're ending the era of just algorithmic hostility, and there'll be something better on the other side. But to the extent that that's going to be the case for the foreseeable future, you just got to get used to it. if any young reporter coming up, I would tell them just get absolutely used to anonymous people on the internet saying the most insane things about you, and just brush it off, because having the experience of getting beat up like that, it thickens your skin, and eventually you just ignore it. But I agree with you. The experience on Substack, partly because there's a little bit more buy-in for subscribers. We're giving you an email address. Some percentage of them are obviously
Yep.
paying. You're creating like a community of the community here is like nothing else on other platforms in terms of the quality of the conversation. Like any community, there's always a danger of groupthink if everyone's too tightly together. But that's the best way to avoid that is just to read widely. And there's a huge range of intellectually honest opinion on
Yeah.
Substack, which
Yeah.
doesn't. I mean, it doesn't exist in a lot of places. You don't have a lot of interesting, thoughtful people, conservatives on Twitter. You have loud racists and Nazis who somehow rise to the top of the algorithm there. It's an absolute sewer. What did you do with your account? Did you delete it? Is it just sitting
No,
there? Do
it's
you use
there.
it?
It's there. It's there. And what happens is when people post stuff about me on there that is good, I will retweet it, but I don't post original content on Twitter anymore. I mean,
You don't even
I,
you don't even you don't even uh promote your
no,
Hopium writing on there.
no, I don't,
Yeah.
because I think that we have to wean ourselves from Twitter. I mean, I've actually been very critical of the Democratic Party communications shops, which still are using Twitter as a primary way of moving their information. And there's a difference between using Twitter as one of the places that you post, as opposed to being the place where you direct people to. And
Yeah. Yeah.
we should
I
not be,
hear you.
we need to wean ourselves, because Twitter is a, you know, we know what it is, right? And I think that part of what we have to recognize, that I do think, when I started Hopium, one of the lines that I had about why I was starting Hopium was that I said that I don't think that people in Washington really understand the nature of the conflict that we're in.
Hmm.
And I think that there has been an unbelievable slowness, or to understand the nature of the information war that we've all actually been living in, and how manipulated it's been by hostile foreign powers and by bad actors and malevolent forces. And we, on in the pro-democracy space in the Democratic Party, we got our asses burned really bad by being naive, and by being, believing, to your point, that sort of like the way you do communications is you still try to get on MSNBC and the New York Times. And so I've been really proud of Midas Touch, of Courier Newsroom, of, um, you know, uh, of, uh, Lincoln Square Media, the Bulwark, the stuff you're doing, Ryan. We people are, this idea that we all had, that we needed this sort of more honest space of discourse, and it's happening, right? And
Yeah.
Substack and
Yeah.
Hamish and everybody deserve an incredible amount of credit. But where I also give a lot of credit is to the audience driving this, right? Like, people
Yeah.
are desperate for this kind of more authentic engagement. And, part of it is I sit in my son's room. You were joking before we came on here that I have this kind of gritty TV, video appearance.
Authentic.
Yeah,
Authentic.
authentic. Yeah, no, but that's why I do it,
Yeah.
right? I'm
I
actually,
copied your aesthetic.
yeah, thank you. No, but I'm trying really hard to resist, what's the old small R Republican line, the adornments, and things that are
Yeah.
unnecessary, right? We're in a small R Republican moment, right, where we have to reinvigorate our republic. And I think, being unadorned is actually really important right now in our the way that we communicate. And And certainly when we use this platform live, it's very unadorned.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think I think it's great that I mean, people have come to expect and even appreciate that. You know, they don't want it to be too
Yeah.
fancy. Although my
Yeah.
son is a guitar player, and I just had lunch with him, and I asked him to he's over the weekend he's going to he told me he's going to compose some intro and outro music for my lives. So I'm going to adorn them in that way soon.
Well, hopefully it's something that you want, right? And as a dad of three Gen Z kids, good luck getting that through the system.
It's true. He has a lot of gigs this weekend, so we'll see
I know,
if I make the top of his
kids have,
priority list.
and his understanding of who you are may not be yours, and so you'll navigate that together.
No, that's fair.
Yeah.
Um,
Anything else,
what
my friend? Yeah.
quickly, Simon? Just I want to talk a little bit about what are the most important debates that are happening in the Democratic Party right now, as uh, Democratic strategists turn to the midterms, turn to the meaty part of Trump's legislative agenda going through Congress. Just sort of big picture, what's your advice to Democrats, and what are you talk to Democrats,
Yep.
elected officials all the time, people who
Yep.
want to run for office. What are the important debates right now, and that need to be settled?
So, wow, it's an interesting question.
I know it's a lot there. We could go another 45
Yeah,
minutes on that
I know,
alone.
and
But
I'm
take a quick
yeah,
bite at it.
yeah. I think there are. I think we're in the beginning of all of those debates, and I think that one way I look at what's going to come next is that I think presidential primaries are really, really important for creating competition of ideas, of tactics, of arguments, of rhetoric, of language, policy. And, we didn't have really competitive, we've had a lot of years now where we didn't, a lot of cycles where we didn't have really super competitive primaries. And we didn't have one in 2016. We didn't have one in 2024, whatever the hell 2020 was, right, during COVID. Obama didn't have one in 2012, right? And so we need, as a party, we need this competition now of these 20 people that are sniffing around running for president to be out there competing with each other to advance and move us forward. And I actually will tell you, as somebody who's been through this now, I've been with the party in every election since 1988. Right, it's hard for me to believe that. Is that I joke I used to be Luke and now I'm Yoda. Right? Is that is that the process we're about to go through is going to be unbelievably healthy and regenerative for us because we actually have a lot of really talented people. And one of the things that happens, people are like, who do you think's going to win? It's like whoever does the best job. I mean, the truth is, we have no idea as a party about what to do now. We've been slow. Look, we got off the mark slowly against Trump. We were not really ready for what happened. And so at a strategy level, I'm super encouraged about this notion there are going to be 15 or 20 unbelievably talented, capable people competing with each other
You think it's
with
going to be that
incredible.
many too? 15
Yeah,
to
because
20. It's
I
going to be a
think
big field.
Yeah, well, for now, right? For now, right? In this early stage, it will winnow at some point, right? But for now, it includes people like Gina Raimondo and like people who perhaps are not as household names who at least are sniffing around, right? And will be giving speeches and weighing in on national thing. And I think that makes this period really exciting for us institutionally. And also we've seen even just in the last few months that people through their pluck and plum and their skill and their ambition have broken through. I mean, Chris Murphy and Maxwell Frost and Bernie and AOC and Chris Van Hollen and Cory Booker. I think in the sense that because we don't have strong top down leadership right now, it's creating far more kind of entrepreneurial responses to the moment, which may be painful in the short term, but probably better for us over the medium and long term. Because I think it allows people to far more innovation and testing of new things to happen out in the real world. It's also at a grassroots level, for those of you who are active in politics watching this, when you aren't being told what to do and you're having in your own community decide if you're going to do a Tesla takedown or do a hands-off event or do a empty chair town hall, there's much more distributed ownership of the movement now than there would be if people were following a strong Washington set of mandates, because people are taking
Yeah.
responsibility on their own. It's very de Tocquevillian, right, in that sense. And so I think that what's happening is sustainable and strong in the arc of time, right? And so the debates that are going to come, you and I could sit here and make a list of them now, but in 6 months they're going to be completely different. As because for now, what we have to do is we have to operate on a two-track process, right? We have to mitigate the damage that's being done, and then also build to win elections, and we have to do both simultaneously. And I think that we were a little bit slow to mitigate the damage part. I think we were not the Washington. One of the things we learned is the House and Senate are hidebound institutions. They've been around a long time, and they were slow to adapt to these new circumstances. I think that's changing, and there's a lot of momentum. And then finally, I do think one of the most interesting things that are going on is this debate about how focused do we have to be? Uh, is there one issue they focus on the economy? This is my son calling. Let me get rid of him. And I'm
We'll get
sitting
you
in
off
his
here. We'll get
yeah,
you off.
yeah,
Oh, he's what
yeah,
he wants
yeah,
to
yeah,
come in
yeah.
his room.
I know. I'm sitting. That cardinal behind my shoulder is my son. This used to be his bedroom.
I love it.
Yeah, I know. The so I think that one of the most interesting areas now of discussion is obviously the question about how hard do we fight and all that. I think everyone is on board now about fighting as hard as they can. There's just different understandings of what that is, right? But the
Yeah.
second thing that I think is actually really important and perhaps not as well understood is that there is this pressure in the consulting class to push Democrats to stay as narrowly focused on Medicaid and the economy and to not open up what I call these second and third fronts. And I think that my own view about this is that we need to have a big conversation around this kind of more recent theory that you have to sort of stay narrow as opposed to open up multiple fronts. And I think this is actually part of the reason why Schumer and Leader Jeffries were a little bit slow to move into this arena around Trump's abandonment of the Constitution and dismantling of our federal government, because they were being told that they needed to stay focused on tariffs, prices, and everything else. And I think that we can do more than one thing at a time. And
Yeah.
I think that in a war, you don't fight on only one front. You try to open up multiple fronts. Your opponent is weak, you then open up these multiple fronts to weaken him further. And I think that the consultants who are telling our leaders to stay narrow are not giving advice that is consistent with where we are right now, and that we are in an unprecedented place, and we should not be following playbooks from previous periods. We're inventing this thing anew every day. And I think that, and so and then my final point I'll make is that look, I think that I hope, in my hope now is that when we get to the other side, and as we go through the process of getting to the other side, that there's an opportunity for us to relearn powerful lessons about why this country was founded in the first place, and that we architected and built a nation and a politics that imagine how a world could be without monarchy and without oligarchy and without top-down control. That it was we the people and not l'état c'est moi, right? And that we need to go through as a nation a reconnection to all of that
Mm.
as part of the way that we defeat Trump. I have called for example, the idea of owning the 4th, where we make July 4th a really uncomfortable holiday for him. Because July 4th is a celebration of the separation of this country away from somebody just like Donald Trump. And it's a reminder that we built an entire political system as a rejection of him, and that we kept somebody like him from running this country for a very long time, right? For over 200 years. And that I hope that my great hope, and one of the reasons I'm pushing so hard for us to lean harder into patriotism and argue that he's a betrayer of everything that's made America great for all these years, is that I think we're going to have to go through the process now of new generations relearning those fundamental lessons from the 18th century of what the founders and why the founders architected this nation the way they did. And I think that also makes this period really exciting because
Mm.
you could see a rejuvenation, a rebirth of freedom, of liberty, and all the founding principles in a time when it's under unprecedented threat. And I think that we will be far stronger if we're leaning into patriotism and love of country and hugging the flag and owning the fourth than if we're spending all of our time just talking about Medicaid, right? And that I think that there's a gear and an emotional place that we haven't tapped into yet that can make us very powerful. And so those are just some thoughts, Ryan. You asked a
Well,
very
you're
provocative
literally
question.
no, look, and we'll continue to talk about this, and you're ending on a, well, your Substack is called Hopium Chronicles, and
Okay.
anyone who's listening, if you're not subscribed, obviously you should subscribe to Simon. You're a lot more optimistic than others. One of there's I hate to end on a down note, but I interviewed Michael Ludig earlier this week, and I
Yeah.
asked him a similar question about, he went through 16 of what he calls Trump's signature initiatives, 16, all the big ones that we
Yeah.
talk about all the time, tariffs and the executive orders. And, he was on the federal bench for 15 years, and he
Yeah.
concluded that there was not a legal or constitutional authority for a single one of those 16 issues. Now, these are all the issues that are being litigated in the courts. And that's just a stunning conclusion that needs to
So
be integrated in everyone's understanding of what's going on. That the clear kind of conventional wisdom that is really not much of an argument on the other side of this right now, as far as I can tell, is that the overwhelming majority of Trump's actions have violated the Constitution and don't have a lawful underpinning. That is just, and
so
look, the courts will sort all this out. Maybe some things will be declared constitutional after all, but that is a shocking observation. And I asked him, does he have
yeah.
any hope that, will steer the ship back in a more legal constitutional direction? And this is what he said to me. He said, I don't have any confidence at all today that we will come out the other side of this. What I do know today is that it would be impossible to say after Donald Trump's first 100 days in office that America has a government of laws, not of men. That's Michael Ludig,
So
conservative
let me
federal
respond.
judge.
Yeah. No, no, but I agree with everything
And
he said. And if you're a Hopium subscriber, is that this is something that I literally talk about and write about every single day. And I
yeah,
have been disappointed, frankly, in the political leaders of the Democratic Party for not having made this far more salient. Donald Trump has abandoned the constitutional order. He's acting as if it doesn't exist, that he's
yes,
bound by
yeah,
nothing. He's not bound by our laws. He's not bound by our constitution. He's not bound by treaties. He's not bound by, legal agreements that we have signed with hundreds of countries around the world. He's not bound by contracts, right? He just wipes out contracts that are legally binding contracts with entities all around the world. And the scale of the lawlessness is staggering. I mean, the vaporization of USAID, there wasn't any legal basis behind this. And this is why you're right to admonish me or to challenge me, which
oh,
is
I'm not
that
admonishing you at
no,
all.
no, 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 no. But what I'm saying is that going back to what I had told you earlier as a way of
Yeah,
ending, is that I do think there is no way to get to the other side
yeah,
without there being a reconnection, a rejuvenation, of a new set of a relearning of all these
yeah,
founding principles about why it was this country was founded in the first place. And it could be that we look back on this 10 years from now and say, America's come out of this experiment, this period stronger, more vital in its defense of liberty and of democracy. We are not going to come out of this a stronger nation. I think that Donald Trump has permanently damaged the United States. And there are things that we simply, our reputation, our financial system, American exceptionalism, I mean, all these things have been permanently damaged. And this notion that I think that we're going to come out in 10 years and be stronger as a nation than we were, I don't know that that's possible. any longer, at least in my lifetime, right? But what is possible is that the zealotry and the commitment to essential Republican, small d democratic principles could become far more intense and animating to what we do, to what happens to our kids' generations, right?
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
become fiercer protectors of democracy here and around the world because they've almost had it taken away from them. And so where I come down, Ryan, just to end, is that yes, this thing we're talking about should be far more central
Yeah.
to the discussion that Democrats are having with the American people. And I will be honest, I've been disappointed that it's been secondary or tertiary to
Yeah.
how we understand the moment. And so, yes, we're aligned in that regard. And
Yeah.
welcome to Substack, brother. It's good to see, it's
Thank
good
you.
to see you.
I
It's good to see you again. And I
and
look forward to
and
many
in the
more discussions in the future.
Me too. And in the great spirit of selling Substack subscriptions, if you subscribe to you should subscribe to Hopium Chronicles. If you don't subscribe to Tellus, I set up a special 20% off 20% off offer. You go to tellus.news, that's telos.news/Simon, www.tellus.news/Simon, and get 20% off an annual subscription. Simon, thank you for doing this, my
Good to
friend.
see you.
And
And
we'll do this again in the future, I hope.
happy Friday. Happy Friday. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. All right. Take care, buddy.
See you, brother. Take care.
Bye.